Life Behind Bars, Daily Routines Inside Maximum Security Units Chapter 1, The Sound of Steel. Before we begin, if you're drawn to the darkest corners of the justice system, if you want the stories they don't show you on the tours, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments what you think really goes on behind concrete and steel. Because tonight, we're stepping inside a world most people only see from the outside. The alarm started at 4:17 a.m. It wasn't the slow, rising siren used for drills. It was the hard, stuttering blast that meant something had gone wrong inside Red Tier, the most restrictive housing unit at Blackridge Maximum Security. Officer Daniel Mercer was already awake when the lights snapped on. In a maximum security unit, sleep is shallow, even for staff. Red Tier housed inmates classified as Level 5, gang shot callers, repeat violent offenders, men who had proven they couldn't function even in high-security general population. Each cell was a concrete box with a steel door and a narrow slit of reinforced glass. Movement was controlled. Conversation was limited. Every routine was measured in seconds. Mercer had worked Red Tier for 7 years. He knew the rhythms of the place: the 5 a.m. count, the 6:30 meal slot, the controlled recreation cages, the silent escort lines. He knew which inmates banged on doors for attention and which ones sat quietly, watching. But this alarm wasn't routine. He grabbed his vest and stepped into the corridor, boots echoing off polished concrete. Down the tier, other officers were converging towards Cell 114. Cell 114 belonged to inmate Victor Hale. Hale had once run a multi-state trafficking network before his arrest. In prison, he was quiet, disciplined, rarely wrote grievances, rarely asked for privileges. That made him more dangerous, not less. Mercer reached the door as Lieutenant Sarah Collins was barking orders. "Seal the tier. Nobody moves." The slot in Hale's door was open. Inside, Victor Hale was lying on the floor beside his bunk, blood pooling beneath his head. But the door had never been opened. In Red Tier, doors could only be operated electronically from the control booth. No signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No missing bars. And inmates in this unit were alone in single cells. "Camera feed," Collins snapped. They ran the footage back. From midnight to 4:12 a.m., nothing unusual. Hale pacing. Hale sitting on his bunk. Hale staring at the wall. Then at 4:13, the camera flickered. For 9 seconds. When the image returned, Hale was on the ground. Mercer felt the hairs rise on his arms. In a place designed to eliminate unpredictability, unpredictability had just happened. Paramedics confirmed what everyone already suspected. Victor Hale was dead. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Inside a locked cell. The prison went into immediate lockdown. No movement. No meals outside cell slots. No showers. Every inmate confined. Every officer reassigned. Red Tier had protocols for everything: riots, assaults, hunger strikes. But this was different. Because if someone could kill a man inside a sealed maximum security cell, it meant one of two things. Either the system had failed, or someone inside the system had helped. By 8 a.m., investigators from the Department of Corrections Internal Affairs Unit arrived. Among them was Special Investigator Mark Reyes, a former homicide detective who had traded city streets for prison corridors. Reyes walked the tier slowly, studying the doors, the hinges, the seams in the concrete. "Maximum security," he muttered. "That's what they call it." He asked for daily routine logs. Red Tier operated like a machine. Every action was documented. Every door opening, every meal slot, every escort, every shower rotation. Inmates left their cells one at a time, hands cuffed behind their backs, escorted by 2 officers minimum. Victor Hale had not left his cell in 3 days. Reyes studied Hale's background. No recent disciplinary reports. No recorded threats. But Hale had influence. Quiet influence. The kind that didn't show up in paperwork. Mercer sat across from Reyes in a cramped interview room. "You worked this tier last night?" Reyes asked. "Yes." "Anything unusual?" Mercer hesitated. Hale asked for an extra blanket. "That's unusual?" "No. But he doesn't ask for anything. Ever." Reyes scribbled notes. "In maximum security units, routine is power. Strip away routine, and tension fills the vacuum." Every inmate on Red Tier would have heard the alarm. Every inmate would know something major had happened. And inside these walls, information spreads faster than contraband. By midday, Whispers were already sliding through ventilation grates. Hill had been talking. Hale had been writing letters. Hale had a deal. Inmate Marcus Graves Donnelly, housed 3 cells down, requested to speak with investigators. Graves was serving life without parole. Former enforcer for a prison gang. He had a reputation for silence. Reyes entered the interview room cautiously. Graves leaned back in his chair, shackles clinking softly. "You're looking in the wrong place," Graves said calmly. "Where should I look?" Reyes asked. Graves smiled faintly. "Not at us." He nodded toward the ceiling. Reyes followed his gaze. "The booth?" he asked. Graves didn't answer directly. "Doors don't open themselves. Control booths in maximum security units are fortresses within fortresses. Bullet-resistant glass. Electronic door panels. Surveillance monitors. Only authorized officers rotate through them." Reyes requested logs from the control booth between midnight and 4:30 a.m. No unauthorized access. No log door openings. But there it was again. At 4:13 a.m., a 9-second system glitch. 9 seconds in a place where every second is tracked. Reyes requested maintenance records. 3 weeks earlier, the unit's camera system had been updated. New software. Remote diagnostics capability. Limited outside vendor access for troubleshooting. "Who has remote access?" Reyes asked the IT supervisor. "Only approved contractors," the supervisor replied. "And only with authorization." Was there authorization at 4:13 a.m.? The supervisor hesitated. "I'll have to check." Meanwhile, daily life in Red Tier continued, or what passed for life. Meals slid through slots. Plastic trays scraped against metal. Inmates exercised alone in chain-link cages under open sky, watched by armed guards in towers. Conversations were shouted in fragments through vents. The rhythm of isolation resumed, but it felt tighter now. Charged. Mercer walked the tier that evening with new eyes. He stopped at cell 110, then 111, 112. Every man inside had a story. Every man had enemies. But the architecture of maximum security was designed to prevent exactly what had happened. He reached cell 114. Maintenance had already scrubbed the floor. The blood was gone. The cell looked identical to the others. Concrete slab bed, stainless steel sink, toilet bolted to the floor. But something caught his eye. On the underside of the metal bunk frame, barely visible, was a faint scratch. Mercer crouched. It wasn't random. It was a number. For 13, he felt his pulse quicken. He reported it immediately. Reyes stared at the photo of the scratch number. He knew, Reyes murmured. "Knew what?" Mercer asked. "That something was happening at 4:13. Back in the IT office, the supervisor returned with a printout. "There was remote access," he said quietly. "From where?" Reyes demanded. The supervisor swallowed. "From inside the facility." Silence settled over the room. Internal remote access required a secure terminal. "Which terminal?" Reyes asked. The supervisor looked at the screen, face draining of color. "Control booth 2. Mercer's booth." Reyes turned slowly toward him. Mercer's chest tightened. "That's impossible." Reyes didn't accuse him. Not yet. But the implication hung in the air. Inside a maximum security unit where every movement is tracked, someone had overridden the cameras from inside the building. At 4:13 a.m., the exact moment scratched beneath a dead man's bunk. Victor Hale hadn't been surprised. He had been waiting. And as Reyes stared at the access logs, one more detail emerged. The login credentials used for the override belonged to someone who had clocked out at midnight. Lieutenant Sarah Collins. But Collins swore she had left the facility hours before the alarm. And if her credentials had been used after she left, then someone inside Red Tier wasn't just manipulating doors. They were manipulating identities. And when investigators pulled the extended footage from the corridor camera outside Control Booth 2, what they saw in those missing 9 seconds changed everything. Because for a split frame, less than half a second, a shadow passed across the booth window. A shadow that didn't belong to Mercer. A shadow that meant someone else had been inside. Chapter 2 would begin with the question no one inside Blackridge wanted to answer. Who controls a prison built to control everyone else? By the time dawn scraped its pale light across the razor wire of Blackridge Penitentiary, the entire facility was on lockdown. Inmates were ordered to the floor. Steel doors slammed shut one after another, echoing like gunshots down the concrete corridors. Correctional officers moved in tight formations, boots striking the ground in synchronized urgency. Nobody was allowed to speak. Nobody was allowed to move. Because sometime between 2:13 a.m. and 3 a.m., Marcus Vale had vanished. The cameras had captured him lying on his bunk at 2:11. At 2:13, the feed glitched, 2 seconds of digital static. When the picture returned, his bed was empty. The cell door had never opened. The biometric lock showed no tampering. The electronic log displayed no manual override. And yet the most dangerous inmate in Blackridge was gone. Warden Helena Crow stood in the surveillance room, staring at the frozen image of the empty bunk. Her jaw tightened. "Pull every angle," she ordered. "I want sewer access, roof cams, perimeter heat scans. Everything." Detective Adrian Keller arrived within the hour. He had spent 15 years chasing men like Marcus Vale, organized crime architects who never dirtied their hands but left entire cities bleeding in their wake. Now, somehow, the man he had personally put behind bars had disappeared from the most secure facility in the state. Keller didn't look surprised. He looked furious. "Inside job," he said quietly. Crow crossed her arms. "You don't know that. I know Marcus Vale doesn't vanish. He orchestrates." They reviewed footage frame by frame. Guards conducting routine checks. Inmates asleep. Nothing unusual. Until they noticed something subtle. At 2:12 a.m., Officer Daniel Ruiz paused outside Vale's cell. He stood there for 8 seconds longer than protocol required. 8 seconds. Then he moved on. Keller leaned closer to the monitor. Zoom in. Ruiz's face was partially obscured by shadow, but his hand was visible near the panel beside the cell door. Crow frowned. The lock never registered an entry. Then it wasn't the lock. They pulled maintenance schematics of the unit. Blackridge's maximum security wing had been renovated 5 years earlier, adding a secondary emergency ventilation shaft behind select cells, a narrow passage designed for smoke extraction during fires. Only staff had access, and only someone with clearance could disengage the interior panel. They rushed to Vale's cell. The back wall looked solid, until maintenance pried at a seam hidden behind the metal bunk frame. The panel came loose with a metallic groan. Behind it, darkness. A ventilation shaft barely 2 feet wide. Scrape marks lined the interior. Crow exhaled slowly. That shaft leads to the service corridor above the laundry facility. Keller didn't wait. He climbed in. The shaft was tight, coated in dust and rust. About 12 feet in, they found it. Fabric caught on a bolt. Prison-issue cloth. Marcus Vale had crawled through there. But that wasn't the real shock. Halfway down the shaft, Keller found something else. A small, folded piece of paper wedged into the metal corner. He unfolded it carefully. 3 words written in clean, deliberate ink. "You missed one." Keller's stomach turned cold. Back in the warden's office, tension thickened the air. Ruiz was brought in, pale and sweating. "I didn't open the cell," he insisted. "I swear." "You lingered outside it," Keller said, placing the still image on the desk. Ruiz swallowed. He talked sometimes. Said things." "What things?" Ruiz hesitated. "Personal things." Crow's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "He knew about my sister. About her medical bills. Things I never told anyone here." Keller leaned forward. "Did he offer to help?" Ruiz shook his head rapidly. "No. That's the thing. He didn't threaten. Didn't bribe. He just knew." Marcus Vale had built his empire on information. Blackmail. Leverage. Secrets traded like currency. Even behind bars, he had been gathering data. But how? Blackridge's maximum security inmates had no internet access. Phone calls were monitored. Mail was screened. Unless someone inside had been feeding him. They audited communications, dug into recorded calls, scrutinized visitor logs. Vale had received only one visitor in the last 6 months. A prison chaplain, Father Thomas Whitaker. Keller requested immediate questioning. Whitaker arrived composed, hands folded calmly in his lap. He was in his early 60s, soft-spoken, known for counseling inmates no one else would speak to. "You're accusing a priest of aiding an escape?" he asked gently. "We're asking questions," Keller replied. Whitaker maintained eye contact. Marcus Vale sought redemption. That was all. "Redemption doesn't involve ventilation shafts," Crow said sharply. They reviewed visitor room footage. Whitaker sitting across from Vale, speaking quietly. No visible contraband exchanges. But something subtle caught Keller's eye. Every visit, Whitaker carried a leather-bound Bible. Every visit, he placed it on the table between them. Keller requested the Bible. Inside, hollowed pages. And tucked within the cavity, a micro-sized flash drive. Crow stared at it in disbelief. Whitaker's calm demeanor fractured for the first time. "It's not what you think," he began. Keller held up a hand. "Save it." Forensics examined the drive. Encrypted files. It took hours to crack. What they found stunned them. Detailed blueprints of Blackridge's ventilation systems. Shift schedules for guards. Financial records, specifically debts and medical expenses belonging to 3 correctional officers. Marcus Vale hadn't escaped alone. He had engineered psychological leverage over multiple staff members. But Ruiz's name wasn't on the financial list, meaning he wasn't bought. He was simply intimidated, which meant at least one other officer had actively participated. Before they could detain Whitaker, an alarm blared through the facility. Another incident. Unit D. An inmate had been found unconscious in his cell. Not injured, not assaulted, drugged, and pinned to his uniform was another note. "You missed too." Keller stared at the words. Marcus Vale wasn't just escaping. He was playing. The drugged inmate, Simon Greaves, had worked kitchen duty, one of the few roles that allowed limited movement between sections. In his locker, investigators found an empty compartment behind the wall panel. Inside, residue consistent with sedatives. Someone had been stockpiling medication. Greaves regained consciousness hours later. He was terrified. "I didn't help him," he insisted. "He told me if I didn't hold onto the package, someone outside would disappear." "Who?" Keller demanded. Greaves' voice cracked. "My daughter." Marcus Vale had never needed physical force. He weaponized fear. By late afternoon, a pattern emerged. Vale had orchestrated distractions across the facility, false conflicts, staged medical incidents, subtly testing response times and guard rotations for weeks, all while mapping vulnerabilities. Keller felt a chill settle into his bones. Marcus hadn't improvised. He had rehearsed. Then another discovery hit. Perimeter heat scans from 3:07 a.m. showed a brief thermal signature near the facility's waste disposal exit. A delivery truck had departed minutes later. They tracked it down. The driver swore he hadn't seen anyone, but inspection revealed something chilling. The truck's undercarriage bore fresh scratch marks and fibers matching prison-issue fabric. Marcus Vale had likely clung beneath it, riding out of Blackridge unnoticed. But the deeper they dug, the more unsettling the truth became. Financial analysis revealed a wire transfer made that morning from an offshore account long believed frozen. The recipient? An unregistered property 3 counties away. A farmhouse. Remote. Isolated. Keller assembled a tactical team immediately. They approached the farmhouse just before dusk. Windows dark. Silence heavy. Inside, the air smelled stale. On the kitchen table sat a single envelope, addressed to Detective Adrian Keller. His blood ran cold. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. Keller's own apartment building, taken that day, and a handwritten message beneath it. "You missed 3. Crow's voice broke the silence. "He's not running." Keller stared at the photo. "He's hunting." Marcus Vale hadn't simply escaped to disappear. He had left Blackridge with unfinished business, and Keller was at the top of the list. But what none of them yet understood, what they were still blind to, was that Marcus Vale's escape had never been about freedom. It had been about control. And somewhere, someone inside Blackridge was still helping him. Because while Keller stood in that farmhouse kitchen, reading the threat against his own home, a guard back at the prison quietly deleted a security log entry from 2:13 a.m. And no one noticed. By the time Keller reached his apartment building, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel. Uniformed officers had already sealed off the block. Patrol lights painted the walls in pulses of red and blue, washing over windows where neighbors stood frozen behind curtains. He pushed through the barricade. "Nothing inside, sir," one officer said quickly. "No forced entry. No sign of him." Keller didn't answer. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering, not from fear, but from something colder. Calculation. Marcus Vale didn't make empty threats. Inside, everything looked untouched. Furniture in place. Dishes in the sink. The air still carried the faint scent of coffee from that morning. But on the kitchen counter sat something new. A chess piece. A black king. Keller stared at it for a long moment. Marcus had always loved strategy. In court, he'd once described criminal enterprises as living chessboards. Every pawn expendable. Every move intentional. Keller picked up the piece. Taped beneath it was a small scrap of paper. Check. No address. No demand. No timeline. Just a statement. Behind him, Officer Maddox cleared his throat. "We swept the building. He's not here." Keller nodded slowly. He was. And that was worse. Back at Blackridge, the internal investigation had widened. Financial records showed 2 correctional officers with sudden debt payments cleared within hours of the escape. One was already under surveillance. The other, Senior Officer Caleb Dorn, was missing. Dorn had called in sick that morning. His house was empty. His phone discarded in a drainage ditch 15 miles away. Warden Crow felt the walls closing in. If he's compromised one senior officer, how many more? The answer came faster than she expected. At 11:17 p.m., a breach alert triggered at Blackridge's evidence storage unit. Not inside the inmate wing. In the administrative annex. Security footage showed someone entering with valid credentials. Face partially obscured by a cap. But gate recognition flagged it instantly. Caleb Dorn. Only Dorn wasn't supposed to have access to that wing without secondary clearance. Crow replayed the footage, dread pooling in her chest. Dorn entered the storage room. Spent exactly 4 minutes inside. Exited empty-handed. But when investigators opened Locker 42, Marcus Vale's confiscated property, they found something missing. A leather-bound journal. Keller arrived minutes later. What was in it? He demanded. Crow hesitated. Notes. Names. Observations. We believed it was just psychological rambling. Keller's jaw tightened. Marcus doesn't ramble. For years, Vale had documented everything. Guard weaknesses. Inmate alliances. Supply chain routes. Conversations overheard through vents. The journal wasn't sentimental. It was a blueprint. And now it was gone. Meanwhile, across state lines, a highway patrol officer noticed an abandoned sedan near a wooded rest stop. The engine was still warm. Inside the trunk lay a body. Caleb Dorn. No visible trauma. No signs of struggle. But his wrists bore faint impressions. Zip ties, recently removed. And in his pocket, investigators found the missing journal. On the final page, written in Dorn's handwriting, were 3 words. He knew first. Keller read the message twice. He knew first. Knew what? Forensics revealed something else. Under Dorn's fingernails, traces of industrial lubricant, the same kind used in Blackridge's ventilation maintenance. Meaning Dorn had been physically involved in Marcus's extraction. But why return the journal? Unless Marcus wanted it found. Keller drove back to the farmhouse where they had discovered the first note. He walked through it slowly this time, looking beyond the obvious. The dust on the floor wasn't evenly disturbed. There were 2 sets of footprints when they first arrived. Not one. Marcus hadn't been alone. And then it clicked. You missed 1. You missed 2. You missed 3. Marcus wasn't counting victims. He was counting accomplices. Ruiz intimidated. Greaves coerced. Dorn complicit. 3. But there was a 4th. The person who gave him the information to begin with. The source of the blueprints. The debt records. The internal access. Someone higher. Keller returned to Blackridge and requested something unusual. Full audit of administrative access logs for the past 6 months. Not correctional staff. Executive-level clearances. The results stunned everyone. Warden Helena Crow's credentials had accessed the ventilation schematics 3 times in the past month. Crow stared at the report, disbelief flooding her face. I didn't. Keller's expression didn't change. Then someone used your access. Only 2 people had her biometric override. Her deputy, and the head of internal security. Deputy Warden Martin Hale had worked at Blackridge for 18 years. Decorated. Trusted. When they brought him in for questioning, he didn't look nervous. He looked tired. You think I orchestrated this? Hale asked quietly. We think you had the access, Keller replied. Hale sighed. You ever consider maybe Vale wanted you to think that? That was the problem. Marcus Vale never left direct fingerprints. He planted narratives. They dug into Hale's financials. Clean. No unexplained deposits. No debt anomalies. But then a junior analyst noticed something subtle. Hale's daughter had recently transferred to an out-of-state university. Full tuition paid up front. The payment didn't come from Hale's accounts. It came from an educational foundation. One that traced back, through layers of shell companies, to a familiar offshore entity. Marcus Vale's. Hale's composure cracked. He said she'd be safe. Hale whispered. Keller's voice hardened. Safe from what? Hale's hands trembled. From a debt I didn't even know existed. Months earlier, Hale's daughter had co-signed a private loan for a friend. That friend defaulted. Threats followed. Marcus Vale had resolved the issue. And in return, access. Hale hadn't physically opened the cell, but he had authorized system diagnostics that created the 2-second camera blind spot. He had been moved one. Keller felt a grim clarity settle in. Marcus Vale hadn't just escaped Blackridge. He had proven that maximum security was an illusion, that control was negotiable, that every system had pressure points. They moved to arrest Hale. But Marcus wasn't finished. At 3:42 a.m., another body was found. Not in a prison, not in a farmhouse, in a downtown parking garage. The victim, Simon Greaves, the kitchen worker, dead from an apparent overdose. In his pocket, another note. Checkmate. Keller stood over the scene, rain dripping from the concrete ceiling. Greaves had been a liability. Marcus was cleaning the board. But why eliminate Greaves and Dorn, yet spare Ruiz? Unless Ruiz had never truly mattered. Unless the real objective wasn't escape. It was exposure. The following morning, a package arrived at the state attorney's office. Inside, copies of internal Blackridge communications detailing procedural shortcuts, unreported inmate assaults, budget reallocations meant for security upgrades but diverted elsewhere. Marcus Vale had weaponized transparency. Within hours, media outlets were running headlines questioning the integrity of the prison system. Public outrage surged. Blackridge's leadership was suspended pending investigation. Marcus Vale's escape was no longer just a manhunt. It was a scandal. Keller sat alone in his office, staring at the chess piece he had taken from his apartment. Marcus hadn't wanted freedom in the traditional sense. He wanted leverage. By exposing corruption and security failures, he weakened the institution that held him. And in doing so, he shifted the narrative. From fugitive to whistleblower. The twist settled heavy in Keller's chest. Marcus Vale had ensured that even if captured, he would never return to the same system. Because the system itself was now under federal review. Weeks passed. No confirmed sightings. No verified transactions. Just rumors. Then, 3 months later, Interpol flagged a surveillance image from a port city overseas. A man boarding a cargo vessel. Face partially obscured. But the posture, the walk, unmistakable. Marcus Vale. Keller studied the image long after the room had emptied. They thought he had broken out of a maximum security prison. But he had done something far more dangerous. He had exposed the cracks in the walls. And somewhere, beyond reach, he was likely building another chessboard. The final piece arrived 6 months later. A plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Blackridge Penitentiary. Captioned in ink. You built the cage. Below it, one final line. I just showed you the door. Keller folded the photo slowly. Marcus Vale wasn't just a fugitive. He was a reminder that control is fragile, that institutions can be manipulated, and that sometimes the most dangerous criminals don't break the rules. They rewrite them. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what's coming next. Subscribe, because the next case might already be unfolding.